This is the Elgato Facecam Pro, and you're looking at me through it right now. This might be the best webcam out there, but is it the best webcam for streaming? Now, mirrorless cameras for streaming are doable for under $300 all in. I have a video linked right up here going over something like that. But you get far more complication with having to need a capture card, a dummy battery, a micro HDMI to HDMI adapter or micro HDMI cable altogether, and then figuring out how to set that all up and make sure it all works right. Whereas a webcam is plug and play, and that's where the beauty of the Elgato Facecam and Facecam Pro really come in, and any webcam, honestly. Now, right now, you're seeing me through the $300 Facecam Pro. This is Elgato's top of the line webcam, and it's literally just webcam, no microphone. Now, other reviewers have knocked it for that. I honestly don't care. If you're spending this much on a webcam to be used in a streaming setup, you're going to be using an external microphone like me. But I did have to make some adjustments to get the most out of it. So I had to manually set the white balance, manually set the shutter speed and all the settings and optimize it a little bit, and this is the look you get. But I did have to make a bunch of adjustments to get the most out of this webcam. As you can see here, I've made some adjustments to the picture by adjusting contrast. I looked at the saturation, 50%, which was the default, was fine. Manually adjusting exposure by adjusting the shutter speed, 1/60 for 30 FPS would be fine. ISO is 359. That's really awesome. That lets you adjust ISO and shutter speed like a real camera. Like, awesome. And then I manually adjusted the white balance. As well in OBS, I added a little bit of sharpness, which really does help. Now, for comparison's sake, this is my Sony A5100 with the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. That's actually not as wide as the Elgato Facecam, but it's a $400 lens on what was a $270 camera when I bought it, so it's a far more expensive combo. But as you can see, there's just a kind of depth and blur and color that you get with a setup like this that webcams, no matter how expensive they are, still struggle with. But again, it's a more complicated setup and more expensive. Anyways, back on the Elgato, let's go over some quick webcam specs on this one. This is the only webcam on the market that can do 4K 60. Now, 60 FPS at 4K to me for streaming and content creation is not that big a deal for a Facecam like this. But the 4K is because it allows you to punch in, crop in, and not lose as much detail. For example, I can zoom in way in like this and you still get good amount of detail in your face, which is not something that my normal camera setup can do. Let me show you right now. So this is my main camera at 1080p 30, and if I zoom it in, you can see it gets a little bit blurrier compared to what the Elgato was doing. And that's really awesome that a webcam is beating this full-scale mirrorless DSLR or mirrorless camera doing the same thing. Now, we recently reviewed the Insta360 Link, which was an amazing webcam in the price class that competes with this one for around $300. And the sensor size in this one is amongst the biggest. Like, it's literally Razer Kio Pro Ultra, I believe, then Elgato Facecam Pro, and then Insta360 Link. These are your top dog heavy hitters for USB webcams with the biggest sensors. And this one is 1/1.8, which makes it just slightly bigger than the Insta360 Link. Sensor size is a big deal. It's what separates the real cameras from the webcams. And as webcams start to increase and further increase their sensor size, the gap between what a webcam can do and what a mirrorless or DSLR camera can do is really going to start to close. Now, when you have a fixed lens like this, the downside to having a smaller sensor and a fixed lens that you can't really change out is you see the background behind me, you can see it clearly, nice and sharp, right? Well, a smaller sensor means that you don't get as much of the depth of field effect as you would with like the main camera. Like you can see here, I got a nice blurry thing going on back here. And this is all because of the sensor and the lens combo, and the sensor being bigger and me being able to change the lens to with something that's a faster lens, which having an aperture that opens bigger, lets you get this kind of thing going. But a webcam, it just can't do that without a little help. Usually that help comes in the form of NVIDIA Broadcast, adding a blur effect to it. But there are other ways to add a little bit of blur to a webcam, and it can work really, really well. Another spec or feature of the camera is the software. Elgato's Camera Hub software is insanely powerful for these Facecam products that they have. You get so much adjustability in there that you just don't get with any other kinds of webcams, or not a lot of other kinds of webcams. And then even better than that, when you save the settings save to the webcam, so that when you unplug it, move it around, maybe change it to a different USB port, or are on the go with the camera, moving it from computer to computer, your settings that you've optimized it with inside the Camera Hub software are still going to be there. Now, I found the autofocus and minimum focus distance with this webcam to be pretty impressive. I pull this in there, as you can see, it's catching it almost right away, and I can get pretty close with it and it will still focus. Like, getting that close with the webcam and it's still being able to focus, and then boom, here we are. It's really fast. For comparison, let me do that for you one more time on my Sony. And I have a pretty good focusing setup with the Sony, and there you go. And it's basically competitive with that. That's really good. Now, the field of view on this is 90 degrees, which is actually a wider field of view than the Insta360 Link that it's competing with, which means you get more in the frame, more in the shot. Really useful if you don't have a lot of space behind your monitor for you to mount the camera, or if you just want to have this a little bit closer to you, but also still get a lot of what's in the shot, like this. Now, for example, if you didn't have a lot of field of view, again, let's switch back to my main camera. This is not as focused. Like, you can see with the Elgato, more of everything on this side and more of everything on this side. Now, let me switch back to that, and you'll see that you can see now more of the computer and everything just like that. Now, that's really useful. You could always crop in if you don't want that much, but having that much available to you is a really good feature. Now, let's talk about the software just a little bit more. If you go over to the effects panel, you'll see that you have stuff for blur and changing of the backgrounds, even something for NVIDIA broadcast. You could also add more by clicking the plus sign and sort of add your own stuff to it if you wanted to. But the thing here is that I notice is a bit of a weakness is if you want to use those effects, you won't be able to use the webcam at 4K. If I click one of these, you see nothing's happening right here around me. I actually have to switch the camera to a let's see, what is this? A virtual camera listing in OBS, Elgato virtual camera, and then I have to actually bring it down to 1080p. And there we go. I went ahead and moved the frame into the preview area of the Elgato. So this is how it would look like if you didn't have like OBS running, for example. And as you can see now that I'm using the Elgato virtual camera at 1080p 60, you can change the background effects. You could make all sorts of changes to it. If you have NVIDIA broadcast, you can do stuff with that as well. Even have video backgrounds. But here's the one that I liked was the blur effect. And even though it's at 0% still adds a little bit of blur. And to me, like, that's a good amount of blur right there. And just to give you an example of like the effects and how the blur looks and then optimizing the camera, if we go ahead and make this full screen, you'll see that this is starting to look a lot more like it can compete with a mirrorless camera with a decent quality lens that would normally have background blur, but this is doing it through the webcam, through the software, and it's all through Elgato. The blur really does seem to work well. I can move my hands around the frame, I could move my head around the frame, and it's tracking my edges pretty good. I could see it messing up a little bit right there, but it's not that distracting. It's not too bad. Then when we shrink back down to something like this, it gets really difficult to tell. And then if I put myself back in the corner and like it's more of a game cam down here like that, you're gonna see this, you're gonna think, hey, that's a pretty nice camera setup right there. I wonder what it is. And then you find out it's just a USB webcam. You're gonna be impressed. You may not like the price because it is a pretty penny, but you're gonna be impressed. Speaking of the price, if it's something that you don't quite like, and the MSRP is $299, and it is on sale for less than that sometimes, there is also the Elgato Facecam, the predecessor to this one. This is the normal Facecam. You can see that blur struggling with this now. There you go. And this one right now, I believe the MSRP is $149, but it's down to $129. So keep an eye on sales. You might be able to get a deal. $129. Let's switch to that one and see how that looks compared to this one. Now here we are with the Elgato Facecam that can only do 1080p 60 max. That's the biggest thing that you're giving up. But in auto mode, it does not look great. So let's optimize it real quick. Now, with a little bit of optimizations, I try to get it to look as good as I could, and at 1080p, which is what it could do, a little bit of contrast adjusted. You can see my settings here. Let me switch to it, and you'll see that my settings are all right there. Now, what I'm seeing is a major weakness to the normal Facecam is that you have a lack of autofocus. Now, previous reviews and information has mentioned that the fixed focus of it has such a wide range, and that's one of the things to do with the smaller sensor in there, that like you can see that's pretty sharp, right? And that's pretty sharp to here, and that's pretty sharp to there, less sharp. But sometimes you just want good autofocus, and I had to mess with the sharpness in order to get this one to look pretty good here, because without the sharpness, it looks really muddy. Let me show you. This is how it looks with no sharpness filter. I'm blurry. If I lean forward a little bit, it gets better, but I should be in its range, and I look blurry. So fortunately, we could, add some sharpness and optimize that a little bit and all that. But then you go and add the blurry background to this one, like this, using the Elgato virtual camera, which, that being limited to 1080p 60, makes this one basically always run it through the software as long as your system resources can handle it. And then you get the blurry background look to make it a little more mirrorless or DSLR quality looking. But just like the look in my face, no matter what I was changing or doing, it didn't quite look as good as I figured that I was hoping to do with it, man. Maybe I need a little more saturation, right? Like, give me a little more color. Yeah, maybe like that. I manual white balance. I set the shutter speed, set the ISO. I don't know. I'm not as impressed with this one, but at 129 or 149 MSRP, it's not the worst option. It's actually going to be better than a lot of options out there, but it'll be the best 1080p webcam more than likely. However, I feel that with some really good optimization, you can get some stuff from like brands like Nexigo, which I've reviewed and I'll have linked right up here and down in the description. You can get stuff like that to look, I don't know, maybe 90 to 95% as good, if not a little bit more, using video broadcast to do background blur, and you'll get a really good competitive look with a 1080p webcam and save some money. But if you're in the Elgato ecosystem, you want all the configuration that the Camera Hub software can give you. You want control of your webcams through a Stream Deck or the Stream Deck app on your phone and all sorts of stuff like that. Well, then it's a no-brainer. Get the Facecams. Okay, so let's close this out on my main camera, the Sony. So you can see here, it's unbeatable quality for what you're looking at. And that's the reason why the pros and the big streamers and all that end up going the DSLR mirrorless camera route. However, for 99.9% of people out there who just want a camera that will plug in and look 90 to 95% as good as some of those bigger streamers' camera setups, the Facecam Pro is hard to deny. The simplicity of use, the absolute adjustability you have in the software, the control that you'll get with its integration through the Stream Deck ecosystem as well. It's just really difficult to deny that camera for being one of the best that there is. Now, the regular Facecam, I could see, like I've mentioned, some cheaper webcams being able to compete as long as you're able to optimize it well. But again, if you're in the ecosystem, then that's the way to go if you want a webcam and you have Elgato stuff. The 4K functionality, allowing for the reframing and zooming in and all that sort of stuff with the Facecam Pro, is also a huge plus, as well as the awesome autofocus that it has. That's a major benefit it has over the regular Facecam too. And I've mentioned that it's expensive. It really is. But right now, I feel like we're at the point in webcams where if you're going to get a good one, a really, really good one, and they're finally starting to evolve bit by bit, we're at that hump where they're going to be a little bit more expensive than usual. And then as the competition starts catching up, the prices will start coming back down to more reasonable levels. I feel like a high-end webcam that's in this class, maybe 300 is maybe a little bit too much to ask. I've talked with other people and they think that it's perfectly fair, especially for it being plug and play. So maybe I'm the odd one out there, but I feel like 250 or 200 or less would be ideal, since it's just a USB webcam and I can't like pop it off and take it out with me and vlog and record and do photos like I would with a real camera. But yeah, we're at the tipping point, I feel like, when it comes to webcams, and I just want to keep seeing more high quality, larger sensor webcams coming to the market, because it means that options like this are only going to get better and they're only going to get cheaper. I want to know what you think of the Facecam Pro, especially versus the regular Facecam. Drop a comment down below and let's talk about that. Feel free to stop by my stream every Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/coalitionchris. Anyways, I hope you found this video useful, entertaining, or otherwise informative. I'll see you guys in the next video or the next stream, maybe.